Human trash has been discovered on Mars. Our garbage has somehow made its way to the red planet, raising many questions about the impact we're having on the universe beyond Earth. You probably remember the nail-biting 7 minutes of terror video released in 2021. It showed the NASA Perseverance rover parachuting onto Mars on a tether from its descent or jetpack stage after traveling 314 million miles or about 505 million kilometers. Our missions to Mars, like the Perseverance Mars Rover and the Mangalyaan Mars Orbiter, have always tried hard to find signs of microbial life. And this time, they did find something strange, but it wasn't life. The Perseverance and its Ingenuity helicopter are continually discovering tangible reminders of their action-packed landing, descent, and entry into Mars. The rover recently found a piece of landing debris stuck in a jagged rock while doing one of its regular checks of the surface of Mars. The rover discovered a piece of trash that was a thermal material used by NASA to protect the Perseverance spacecraft from extreme temperatures as it traveled to Mars and fell through the Martian atmosphere. But how did this piece of foil get to where it was found, about 2 kilometers away from where the landing gear of the Perseverance mission crashed on Mars? Could the Martian wind have blown it? In February 2021, the Perseverance rover touched down on Mars. The spacecraft carrying the rover dropped a heat shield, a supersonic parachute, and a rocket-powered sky crane that lowered the rover to the ground on its way back to Earth. But is leaving trash behind on Mars a bad thing? It may surprise you that according to scientists, it's even a positive, as future humans will look back on our space litter from these, the first steps of exploration, with great fondness. Dr. Bethany Ehlmann, a planetary science professor at the California Institute of Technology and a scientist working on the Mars rover, argued that when we study the ancient civilizations on Earth, we tend to look through their trash piles. However, these aren't merely heaps of trash, rather they're artifacts left behind by our initial exploration of Mars. In a nutshell, the debris we create during our interplanetary travels will one day be considered valuable by archaeologists working in space. Some also argue that landing zones for these rovers will one day be national parks when humans eventually land on Mars. Historical markers will be constructed out of any pieces of the rover's landing system or foam that may have broken off during the landing process. Naturally, the so-called space litter left behind by space agencies won't be limited to stray pieces of foam and metal that become trapped between rocks. The practice of perseverance will, in due time, become ineffective approximately 10 years from now, most likely as a result of a dust storm. The Ingenuity helicopter and the Zhurong rover, which is currently exploring Utopia Planitia for the Chinese government, are doomed to meet the same untimely end. The Sojourner, Spirit, and Opportunity rovers operated by NASA have not functioned for many years. It seems that everything that is sent to Mars perishes there, except for the parts of the Mars helicopter-aided Mars sample return mission that NASA and the ESA are sending. If you look at a list of the artificial objects that can be found on Mars, you'll notice that the surface of the red planet is covered in landing sites littered with remnants. Others, such as several Soviet landers from the 1970s that didn't return any radio signals, are merely estimated, while some have been pinpointed and examined from orbit. The Mars 2 mission from 1971, which was lost in space, was carrying a robot the size of a vacuum cleaner that was attached to skis by an umbilical cord. We can go on about Mars missions, but one thing is clear: the majority of priceless Martian history is buried under layers of Martian dust. Since humans have not yet landed on Mars, it's difficult to imagine the red planet having protected national parks and monuments that recognize humans' first steps on the planet. However, this is not completely out of the question. On the other hand, having identical structures on the moon doesn't appear to be all that implausible. The garbage on the moon is just as bad as on Earth. Canisters, cables, cameras, hammers, tongs, and yes, bags of human waste are just some of the items that make up the approximately 500,000 pounds, about 226,000 kilograms, of garbage that have been estimated to exist on the moon. Most of it, as one might expect, comes from the Apollo missions. There's a good reason why the History Office at NASA has compiled an exhaustive list of artifacts abandoned on the moon. In the introduction to the list, it stated that as the moon becomes even more accessible to both national space programs and private enterprise, it's quite important that we protect lunar artifacts for both their historic and scientific value. Or, in other words, tradition. Because the moon lacks an atmosphere, the footprints left by the first lunar rovers, and more importantly by the first humans to set foot on the moon in the late 1960s, will be preserved for many thousands of years to come. Or maybe they won't. When people start going to the moon in larger numbers and on private missions, the sites where the Apollo missions landed will become prime locations for people looking to buy souvenirs. According to Gorman, a space archaeologist at the Department of Archaeology at the Flinders University of South Australia, there is a trade in antiquities that involves artifacts that have been stolen from archaeological sites. And there's also a very big collecting market for space stuff. Adding to what Armstrong said, you can only imagine that collectors would pay enormous sums of money for a piece of Apollo 11, which we'll have to watch out for. Gorman believes that we'll need to safeguard the Apollo landing sites, but before we do so, we should revisit them to get an idea of the state in which they are currently located. After that, we should continue to evaluate them as they evolve over time, because only then will we be able to catch criminals in the act. She also adds that the future lunar orbiters will have to monitor these places, keep track of their condition, and also gather evidence of people looting them, such as fresh rover tracks. These objects will be some of the most collectible items ever, and we really do need to start thinking about this. This, of course, is a double-edged sword in the sense that if you publish a list of valuable and collectible items that can be found on the moon, the value of those items will immediately increase. The landing site of Apollo 11 is the most well-known of the historical locations on the moon. However, there is another that may prove to be of even greater interest to archaeologists in the future. The Soviet Union's Luna 2 spacecraft made history in 1959 by becoming the first spacecraft to touch down on the moon's surface. The first satellite was launched into space in 1957, and just 2 years later, a spacecraft crashed into the moon. It's quite amazing, and it also becomes the very first human site on the moon that should be preserved because it's important to humanity. The beginning of the most crucial phase of the mission for the Perseverance rover is right around the corner. In the Jezero crater, the rover is getting ready to investigate a river delta that has since dried up. NASA's planetary scientists think this area was full of water about 3 billion years ago. If there is any place on Mars where they might find signs of microscopic life, either from the past or the present, it will be a huge leap in humanity. The question is, how long will it take us to trash our new home?